All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience as we deal with some technical issues. We're so excited that Yulia is actually able to join us today from Ukraine. Before we begin, just a reminder, we have a lot of different perspectives that we're showcasing here today on the Russia-Ukraine war. And this session is focused on teaching perspectives and specifically from a virtual collaboration by Anne-Michelle Boyle and Yulia Nikul. So I'm going to introduce both of our presenters. And do you have a preference on which order you go in? Okay, perfect. So I will introduce Yulia first in that case. Yulia Nikul has been teaching English at Lubny Specialized School 6 in Ukraine for 22 years. She's also the assistant principal and is in charge of the foreign languages department, which consists of 17 teachers. In addition to teaching and administrating, she does some research work, is a school newspaper chief editor, runs a Euroclub Link and an English speaking club. She also facilitates international connections between between the teachers and students of her school and partners in the world. She's currently involved in Generation Global, Go Camp, and Engine international educational programs. Yulia Nikul is a TEA Fulbright 2011 alumna and lives with her husband and 2 daughters in Lubny, Ukraine. Her interests include reading, gardening, traveling, singing, and performing. And I'm also just going to introduce our other speaker, Anne-Michelle Boyle, who will be speaking after Yulia. Anne-Michelle Boyle has taught at Whitney M. Young Magnet High School since 2006. She teaches AP World History and Global Citizenship, a service-oriented, sustainable development-focused course that she developed. In addition to teaching, she sponsors the Fair Trade Club, Girl Up Club, Dolphin Destinations, and serves on the local school council. Prior to pursuing her career in education, she worked in marketing / advertising at the Chicago Tribune. Anne-Michelle is a Fulbright TGC 2021 fellow and lives with her husband and 3 kids in the Edison Park neighborhood of Chicago. When she isn't teaching or learning, she enjoys reading novels, practicing yoga, and spending time with family and friends. Please welcome Yulia and Anne-Michelle. Yulia, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning to everybody who is present at the conference. It's my unique honor to be speaking today. And, you know, I'm not a native speaker and I'm really nervous. My heart is beating, but still it's this experience is quite interesting and very useful for me and for everybody presented, I believe. Like while I was preparing for the conference, you know that our country is at war and this brings certain challenges and drawbacks. Actually, it was difficult to get ready because we have lack of electric power every day. We have scheduled shut-offs of the power, and that's why I was afraid that I would not be able to connect. That's why I decided to prepare something like Plan B, and that is the presentation, which is actually a video of 20 something minutes about what I wanted to tell you. So actually, I'm going to present the video first, and then I will happily answer all the questions which might occur. So I believe that I can share my screen and okay, just a moment and make it visible for everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name is Yulia Nikul, and here are my great students. We are from Ukraine, and I'm extremely honored to be here and to be speaking at Chicago International Educational Conference. I'm a bit nervous about today's event because I feel great responsibility for my country, my students, and myself. Anyway, I will try to do my best to tell you about how we here in Ukraine manage teaching at wartime. To set the scene, I will tell you a couple of words about our town. This is Lubny. The population here is about 40,000 people, and we take advantage of being very close to our capital, Kyiv, about 4-hour drive. And many our students opt for the universities in the capital, and also many people are employed there. And this is our school. The school boasts a 70-year-old history, and as far as you can see, our environment here is student-oriented, friendly, and supportive. About 70 teachers work here, and they are teaching about 900 students. Our school specializes in foreign languages, and for many students, English is a priority. These pictures were taken long before the war. The war. I could never thought that something like that could happen to a peaceful nation in the 21st century. I remember the day when it all started. One of my old friends called me and said, "Turn on TV." You know, like they usually show in the movies. At this time, it had nothing to do with fiction. It was a horrible reality. Tabloids of the world were covering the event, and Ukraine was on everyone's lips. When I was preparing for this presentation, I interviewed many of my students about how they felt during the first year of the war. And here is Vika. She said that she felt anger, panic, and fear for her life and for the lives of her family, especially during the first weeks of the war. Vika, I know that you want to share your personal story of how everything started for you personally. Please do.
The morning of February 21st began with the sound of a siren. I didn't understand what the sounds were because I had never heard them before. And then my parents told me that the war had started, and of course the school was closed that day. My family and I were confused. We didn't know what to do. At that time, television showed how the attack on Kyiv, Sumy, Chernihiv and Kharkiv regions was happening. We saw the scary shots when countless planes were in the sky, columns of vehicles were moving, and hostilities had already begun. On television, it was said that we need to pack all the most necessary things: warm clothes, food, water, first aid kit, and documents in our bags. The first days were difficult. Inside, we felt anger, panic, and fear for our lives and for the lives of our family. With the first days, we hardly turned off the TV. We constantly watched the news and followed the situation at the front. Since then, we have started distance learning.
This photo in the upper right corner shows the difference between the opponents. Russia said that it was going to be a 3-day war. Independent war expert predicted a 2-week opposition. But Ukrainians knew better. Those who couldn't fight started to volunteer. One of the students here is Yaroslav. He's a transformer. He said that he donated clothes and food to those in need, and he also started to volunteer heavily at the first days of war, and he joined his adult uncle to do Molotov cocktails. Yaroslav, when people speak about the nation in general, they very often, I guess, mean individuals. Was there anything special that you were doing to help to be the part of defense?
Yes, at the first days of war, I began to volunteer heavily. I donated food, clothes to the local charity organization, which then they donated to the temporary displaced persons or our armed forces, which were in need of these things. Also, my uncle signed up for the territorial defense, and I helped them to make Molotov cocktails. That was quite an interesting experience, I guess.
These pictures here also show that we in our school were making masking nets and also metal barriers for vehicles. We were doing anything to defend our country. Boris Johnson, in his speeches about the situation in Ukraine, quoted an old English proverb which says that it's not about the size of their dog in the fight, it's about the size of the fight and the dog. In fact, Ukrainians not only withstood immense pressure, but also made the Russian troops surrender from vast territories. And when the situation became kind of controlled and stabilized in the biggest part of the country, the schooling resumed. Nevertheless, we experienced difficult times. Many people had to leave their families, had to leave their homes and become refugees in other countries. On top of that, frequent air raids, sirens, and attacks cause anxiety and stress. Many students express inability to concentrate. So here is one of my students, Anastasia, and she said the following.
Nastya, these days everybody is trying to overcome different emotions and feelings, and I understand that sometimes we experience stress and anxiety. Can you share your personal story on perspective of emotions and feelings?
Yes, I can. At first, I was absolutely scared because I didn't know anything what could happen to me and my relatives who were in the hotspots. I also couldn't do anything like eat, sleep, or something because of really big stress. Over time, I became a little calmer, but still sometimes my emotions rush out of me because of understanding that tomorrow may not come. All of us understand that we are happy to live in a relative peace, but still, on the other hand, we are tired going through all of it. I try to live fully, but I understand that this opportunity was taken away from me.
Saying the words about relative peace, Anastasia means that we live in the central part of Ukraine and we are kind of far from the front. But one thing has always been clear to Ukrainians since the war started, that we have no other option than to study online. In this respect, I must say that our students didn't study at schools during the coronavirus pandemic, and all in all, they are experiencing lack of face-to-face communication for about 3 years. And here's Ruslan. He will tell you about how he feels about distant learning.
I want to tell you about the distance studying. We have been learning this way since the 7th grade, and now I'm in the 10th. In fact, it is very difficult, especially now, that the lights are turned off every day for a total of 8 hours. A lot of material needs to be worked out by yourself, because lessons can be interrupted due to air raid sirens. And when you study by yourself, a lot of time is wasted. And teachers sometimes give too much homework in order to catch up with the curriculum. So, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. we have video conferences, and it takes about 3 hours to do homework. I also really miss the school atmosphere, breaks with classmates, and all the funny moments at school. I also cannot help but mention that it is much more difficult to study at home, because it is difficult to force yourself to start doing something. So I hope that soon everything will return to the way it was before.
So you heard about students' perspective, and now of course it's time to move to teachers' perspective, how difficulties teachers face when during the everyday life and work. So I have interviewed 5 of my colleagues and hear what they said.
Teaching has never been an easy thing. But during war times, it has become even more challenging. Our teachers and students are facing a great number of problems these days. Personally, for me, the most devastating challenge is electricity power cuts, which occur every day and which may last a few hours on end. You have to be very flexible. You have to be able to change your plans within a few minutes. But we don't complain. Schooling, despite all those challenges and hardships, never stops in Ukraine. We keep going on and we will do it until we win.
Every day I start my Zoom lesson and I don't know the exact number of the pupils who can join. Some of them don't have the electricity or the internet connection. And I start recording my lesson in order to send this video to them later, to give them the chance to watch it. But I'm not sure again if they can do it, because we have power cuts every 4 hours. As for the class, it is not the same as it was. Some pupils went to live in other countries, and I have got some new ones. They are internally displaced people who were forced to leave their homes. Their schools might have been ruined, and these pupils definitely need more attention and support.
Some of the main challenges are unstable connection, a long-lasting working day, because our students send their assignments 24/7, and I am always ready to check them and send my feedback. And one more important thing is that we experience lack of face-to-face communication.
Educators face difficulties such as the risk of violence, students' fear, and safety concerns. In addition, teachers try to help their students catch up academically, supporting them emotionally.
Like other teachers in Ukraine, I am experiencing a lack of stability and safety, as well as inability to ensure quality learning process online. Taking into consideration the time constraints of uninterrupted work online, I doubted whether it's possible for teaching the general overview of the class material, practical work, implementing interactive ways of learning, assessment of the learned material, especially if the online lessons are constantly interrupted by air raid sirens or disconnection of electric power. However, I believe that due to proper time management, it's possible to overcome all the challenges.
This picture here shows the teachers' meeting where they discuss appropriate techniques and methods for distance education. As you see, we never stop. We go on with teaching and self-development. And I want to draw your attention to these two pictures, which were taken from the space. The first shows Kiev before the war, and the second shows Kiev now. It has become much darker from the space, but it has become much brighter in our hearts, believe me. And even when we are short of electricity power, when we hear the sirens, we still go on to teach our students. We go to the bomb shelter and have lessons exactly there.
Є моль, придумали для чогось моль, тоді ця кількість речовини вимірюється в молях і показує, скільки молі, для чого це придумано.
Despite certain risks, the decision on combining online and offline classes was made in Ukraine. Actually, we meet our students only once or twice a week. That's because we cannot safely shelter all 900 students in the bomb shelter simultaneously. Anyway, one of my students, Anya, when I was interviewing her, told me that the fact that they are again at school makes her radiant.
And during the war, we are studying online, and which is very logical. But for that time, I really missed of our communication in the class. and therefore I want to talk about our first day at school. I was really radiant to see all my classmates and teachers. But unfortunately during that time there were also sirens and we had to go to the bomb shelter. But regardless, I hope that in the near future we will study at school.
And here you can see the pictures of how we make up for the lost time. But not our lessons only are the priority for us. We also interact with international community. And at that point, I want to stop and to get back to February 17th, 2022, when we had the joint conference between the USA, India, and Ukraine. And that was organized by the Generation Global team, a very interesting international program organized by Tony Blair's International Institute. So this international program became the reason for something very important and immense in our lives. That was where we met Anne Michelle Boyle and her students from Chicago Whitney High School. I'm so grateful to Anne Michelle for being such a great partner, such an inspiring teacher, and such a warm and kind personality. She and her students were so helpful during the first month of war. The first thing that they actually do was to send us short videos where they were speaking some Ukrainians. And when I turned those videos to my students and they saw how friendly and smiling and supporting American friends were, we have become friends forever. It turned out that the symbols of their school is a dolphin and the symbol of our school is the sun. And we created a great logo of our cooperation with the words inside. And the words sound like communication works for those who work at it. And one thing that I'm very sure of is that we really work a lot. And one of my students, whose name is Ani, said that this cooperation and friendship helps her to distract from negative thoughts, believe in future, and what's very important, trust people. I know that Anne Michelle is going to speak about many of our projects, so I'm going to skip mostly all of them except for a few which proved to be very important for us. So, after their videos, we decided to respond, and we did it with a song. At that time, that song, Hey Good Morning Ukraine, rose our spirit so much that we decided to translate it into English and send it back to the USA. Here you can see the picture of how we were recording the song, and it turned to be really popular, and in a couple of weeks, NBC News team contacted us. That was something really special for me and my students because we understood how important are those people and how popular is that channel, and we knew that we were going to speak about ourselves and about the situation in Ukraine for the whole world. And now I want to express my special thanks to Kayla McCormick and Jake Gray and the whole team of NBC News for the fact that they were so supportive and so friendly towards my students. Actually, just 2 days before their arrival, a missile struck 5 kilometers away from our school. And I thought that they would never come, but they did. And the time that we have spent together, partly in the shelter, partly at school, proved to be really educative, inspiring, and useful. And one of my students, whose name is Misha, singled out that meeting as one of the most important for him, and he said that it was really motivational. And also he mentioned that they just flipped the switch in him.
Misha, our relationships with Ms. Anne Boyle and her students in the USA were full of different events and projects. And personally for you, what is the most memorable thing?
That's a good question. I remember the day when we met at NBC News crew, and that was a really great experience. I remember almost all of them, but like the most person I remember the most was the interviewer and the journalist Jay Gray.
Wow, you can also say hello to him.
Yeah, Jay Gray, if you remember me, I think you do, so hello. And yeah, that was really cool. I remember when we were talking with him on different themes, like about war and about just like themes like boys, you know. And that was like a motivation for me not to give up, to move forward, and that was really cool.
So you are saying that that event was something very important, right?
Yeah, that just flipped a switch in me.
Thank you.
What mission actually meant was that this cooperation and that meeting pushed him ahead with his knowledge, and not only him, but many of my students. They started to prioritize English even more because they understood that they can tell the world about our situation here. In summer, we joined a 2-week online linguistic camp organized by GoCamp. We spent 2 weeks together with 2 other schools from Ukraine and a very interesting person, American volunteer James Grafanias, who not only motivated my students to talk, but also played different musical instruments and showed us his huge collection of musical instruments that he has at home. This is the infographics that we created after the camp, and astonishingly, we see here some very positive designs and smiling faces, which proves the fact that communication and intercultural interaction really helps to overcome stress and anxiety during the wartime. And I must say that amid all these pressures, we still work and cooperate with different international programs. FLEX is the program that my students really like to apply to. Unfortunately, this year we didn't have the finalists, but all in all, 45 students from our school spent the year in the USA. The next program is Engine. This program provides the opportunity for Ukrainian teenagers to communicate with native speakers. The organizers provide matching and interviewing, and then Ukrainian students interact with them on a weekly basis. Fulbright, actually Anne Michelle and I applied to Fulbright grant this year. Unfortunately, not this time, but we are tough and we will do that next year again. And the picture here shows our Euroclub link, which is our school organization, which actively functioned before the war, and we organized international student exchange, and we're going to do that after the war, definitely. And here, as far as I'm speaking in their international event, I would like to share my personal contact for those teachers who would like to have Ukrainian partners, and I promise you that you will find good and interesting cooperation in our school with our students and teachers. And we are 100% focused on our work these days, despite hardships. So here you can see one of my students, Anna, who is doing her research work. She studies linguistics and diplomatic discourse based on Boris Johnson's speeches. Also, I have a speaking club and I carefully prepare it weekly. And we can boast having some out-of-school activities when we try to communicate, to have fun, just to forget about everything negative which surrounds us right now. Taking into account everything mentioned above, I would like to share with you some of my observations. First,
Interpersonal interaction and communication are important for both students and teachers, and this was obvious from my presentation. Second, we have conducted a survey, and 81% of students and 100% of teachers opted for face-to-face schooling. So yes, distance learning is okay, provided that there is no other option, but if you have the chance to meet a student, it's much better. Third, international partnership motivates and enhances academic success at all times, at war times, at peace times. I know and I understand how important it is for my students to use English with those students and partners from the world to understand why we learn it, to exchange our cultures and our ideas and thoughts. And the last but not the least is effective time management, critical thinking, and flexibility help keep up with everyday tasks. You know, it's difficult to do everything in Ukraine on time these days because Russia strikes our infrastructure, and very many power stations suffered from those strikes, and now we are short of power, electricity. But still, if we try to do everything, we manage even if we have just a couple of hours of power a day. And having the unique opportunity to be speaking here today, I want to express my deep gratitude to all the world for what you are doing for us, and also to your country, to the USA in particular. The fact that we are alive, that we are teaching our kids, that we have hope for the future, proves that the truth is on our side. Ukraine will win. Ukraine must win for the sake of freedom, democracy, and liberty. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me here. I hope my presentation was informative. And if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact me at your convenience.
Okay, Anne Michelle. Yulia, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we go to Anne Michelle?
Actually, thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and I hope that you understood the situation here in Ukraine. And I think that probably if you have any questions, I will happily answer them.
All right. Привіт. Hello. I'm going to make you all say it with me because that's hello in Ukrainian. Привіт. All right. Thank you. Привіт. All right. Here is what I'm going to talk about today. Sorry, I'm short, so this over a little bit. Okay. Here is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about my class, Global Citizenship, talk a little bit about our friendship. Well, actually, most of the presentation is about our friendship with Yulia and her students. And then lastly, different ideas for increasing global competencies in your classroom. And that's how you write Привіт in Ukrainian. All right. Krishna already did a great job introducing me, but my undergrad's from Loyola. I have 2 master's degrees from DePaul. I spent 5 years at the Tribune, initially as the marketing analyst and as an advertising sales rep. And I've been a teacher at Whitney Young for the last 17 years. I'm really passionate about my career as a teacher. I teach world history and global citizenship. I love doing yoga, reading novels, and doing a lot of stuff with Fair Trade Club. I also love to travel, and I love spending time with my family. It's a picture of my husband and my 3 kids. My husband's also in education. That's him over there. He's president of Notre Dame College Prep. All right. Our friendship developed within the context of my global citizenship class. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that before I move on. So I developed the course Global Citizenship because nothing like it existed at my school or in Chicago Public Schools. It's a social science elective class that is all about exploring the world's issues through the lens of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are always looking at everything from a global perspective, but also a local perspective. Every unit ends with either a service project or a justice-oriented project, and every unit includes an expert, at least one expert speaker. And here you have our very own Krishna featured in this photo. Krishna is our speaker during our inequality unit. He spoke to my students about discrimination of Muslims in South Asia. So with my class Global Citizenship, while we are always making connections among all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, every about 5 weeks, we focus on a one or two different SDGs. And so, we start the year exploring all of the different inequalities that exist. Then we move on to climate change, clean energy, then peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is what we're currently in, which has a really strong focus on what it means to live in a democracy and the role media literacy plays in a democracy. From there, we move into poverty and hunger, and you get my point. So I'm going to stop with explaining my class. But because of our friendship that has now been a year long with Yulia and her students, we're also always making connections to Ukraine. So for example, in my next unit that'll start later in the month, before we get into current day issues on food insecurity, we're going to explore historical hunger. And so we will, of course, talk about the Holodomor, Stalin's forced starvation of millions of Ukrainians. And as I mentioned, we always have speakers. And so during our climate change unit in November, we had, here's a photo of our speakers from the clean energy company Invenergy. And in addition to talking about their careers as clean energy engineers, they also talked to us about the wind farm that they're currently building in the Baltic Sea to decrease European reliance on Russian fossil fuel. Interestingly, the CEO of Invenergy and the CEO and founder of Invenergy was born in Ukraine and only moved to Chicago to attend the University of Chicago and loved Chicago so much, he stayed and has been, running his company ever since. So only 4% of the world's population is American. And, with both my AP World History students and my Global Citizenship students, I work really hard to instill global competencies in my students. And so, with all of them, I want them to be curious about the world. I want them to investigate, what is here locally, but also issues around the world. And I want them to recognize diverse perspectives, and I want them to be able to communicate effectively. And I want them ultimately to take action to improve the world, both locally and globally. I'm going to circle back to this slide later in my presentation, but because the resources that I use are so essential to instilling global competencies, I wanted to point out a couple now and a few later. And probably many of you already use these, so I'm sorry if I'm, talking to you about them again. But Our World in Data is a website that I use in all of my units. It's a treasure trove of data that is organized in tables, maps, graphs. It's the University of Oxford researchers are behind Our World in Data, and it is especially important when you are teaching about any current events issues, from hunger to food insecurity to the extent to which countries have free and fair elections, to renewable energies and everything in between. AFICRA is another great organization that I actually first learned about because of Center for Middle Eastern Studies here at the university. It's a great organization that promotes diversity and richness of Arab cultures, and play around on their website later and you will find incredible podcasts, readings, videos, and anything you can possibly imagine when it comes to learning and teaching about Arab cultures. Nata Column is another really awesome organization. Nata Column is actually the only one on here that that does require money, but there are a lot of grants available. But because of Nata Column, my students have had hour-long Google Meet sessions with refugees for many years now, and they connect teachers with refugees all over the world. So I've had refugees that are from Syria currently living in Turkey. I've had refugees from Afghanistan currently living in Jordan. I've had refugees from Venezuela currently living in Colombia, refugees from Ukraine currently living in Poland. You get the idea. They work with refugees all over the world. And As a teacher, you can request, hey, I would like to have my students meet someone from or someone currently living in XYZ country, and they work to make it happen. So I want to talk about the Chicago Council on Global Affairs for a little bit, because the only reason I've been participating in Tony Blair Institute's Generation Global, where I met Yulia last year, and I've been participating with them for 5 years, is because of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Chicago Council on Global Affairs is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing knowledge and engagement in global affairs. It's a think tank that isn't specifically designed for teachers, but it is an amazing resource for teachers. In addition to their expert reports that they are always creating, they hold a number of in-person and online events. And it was at one of these online events about 5 years ago that I first learned about the Tony Blair Institute's Generation Global. Additionally, like a lot of nonprofits, they love teachers. So, any teacher that reaches out to them and says, oh, hey, I see you have a really cool program happening on this date. Can I bring students? They always say yes, and will, X off a bunch of their chairs so that you can bring your students to one of their really cool programs. So Generation Global is a global citizenship education program for teens around the world. They work hard to connect students in over 30 different countries. And Yulia and I have both been using and have our students participate in Generation programs for years, specifically and especially the Dialogue Adventure, SDG Dialogue Series, and video conferences. So it was at one of these video conferences almost a year ago, and exactly 1 week before Russia had their full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that Yulia and I first met. So Yulia, her students in Lubny, Ukraine, me and my students here in Chicago, and another teacher from Uttar Pradesh, India, all signed up to do a Generation Global video conference on civic participation. And all of the programs that Generation Global creates is just outstanding for students to learn about and meet other students from all around the world. But my students and I had been, paying attention to the news and talking about the, Russian troops being amassed at the border of Ukraine. And so we were really curious to learn more about this topic. And so we initially asked a question about that, but that wasn't really part of the program. And so I ended up following up just a couple hours later. And I emailed Yulia, because we'd both shared our information in the chat box. So I emailed Yulia and I asked her, what her and her students were feeling and thinking when it came to the troops that were amassed at the border. And also I asked her if her and her students would want to collaborate on a project later in the year. And, Yulia responded similar to what you heard, in the earlier presentation, that, yeah, they were concerned, but they were not overly concerned because, Ukraine has been dealing with Russian aggression since 2014, when Russia first invaded Crimea and the Donbass. And so I told Yulia a little bit about the project that I wanted to participate, that I was curious if she wanted to participate with. And it's the Out of Eden Walk Home Story Exchange. And this is a really cool program that I've been doing, I think, since the beginning, but a little bit about it. Okay, so Paul Salapak, he's maybe the most fascinating man alive. He has been walking the earth for 10 years. He started over here in Ethiopia, and he has walked all through Northeast Africa, all through the Middle East. He walked through South Asia, and he's currently in China, okay? And he's walking the steps of ancient human migration, right? He is tracing that story, but in that time, he's also engaging in long form journalism. And every about 100 miles or so, whoever he comes into contact, he asks the questions: who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? And what does home mean to you? And so the Out of Eden Walk Home Story Project does that exact thing, but with students. And actually, Tracy Crawley over here is the manager of the Out of Eden Walk Home Story Project. So talk to her at the break and she will tell you all about how awesome it is. But I love it so much. I have my students participate in the Out of Eden Walk Home Story Project twice every year. I do it at the beginning of the year during our inequalities unit, where I ask students to interview someone that is or was an immigrant or refugee and asking the same questions that Paul Salopek asks, right? Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? And what does home mean to you? Then toward the end of the year, I have my students do it, but I have them tell their stories of home. So it was in this context that I asked Yulia if her and her students wanted to participate and, toward, in a couple months, get together on a live Google Meet and share out our stories of home. She said yes. Then the war happened. As we all know, the war has been, has totally upended Yulia, her students, and all of the people of Ukraine and the people in Russia. And really, it's changed, I think, all of our lives. Yulia and I messaged back and forth weekly, and the idea of doing a home story project moved to the back of my mind. I was really hesitant to bring it up to Yulia again because a number of her students had fled to other countries. And the students that remained in Lubny, obviously they're, what home meant to them or means to them had drastically changed since the war started. I was afraid of bringing up the idea of our home story project again would, further the trauma that Yulia and her students were already experiencing. As the war became horrifyingly normalized, I did ask Yulia again, and she said yes. And so our students created home stories on a Padlet that I set up. So normally my students only do it on the National Geographic Pulitzer site, but because Yulia and her students are in the midst of a war and there's geolocating involved, we thought it'd be safer if we did it on Padlet. And so we all shared our stories of what home meant, and we talked about, we shared these and we commented back and forth, and we got excited for our live Google Meet where we would share in person these stories. And we were especially excited for our live Google Meet to happen for two reasons. One, this was going to be the first time since the war started that Yulia and her students were going to be in the school. And two, we were excited because this was the first time that Yulia and her students and me and my students were going to be talking live on a Google Meet, because since, February, we had been messaging back and forth, emailing back and forth, doing little videos to each other or Google Doc activities, but we hadn't actually had a live meet. As Yulia mentioned, NBC ended up coming to our schools. And so, hold on, I'm going to show you this 2-minute clip that gets at that.
It's a song of joy with the promise of a new day in a place where there's very little of either right now.
War is death for me, and it is grief. War is the worst thing that can happen in anyone's life.
Lives that, for these Ukraine high school students, often includes air raid sirens and a rush from their classroom to an underground bomb shelter about a block away. A trip that reminds them of the realities of war.
I don't want to lose my family, to lose my friends. It's really, really sad.
A sadness that for some can be overwhelming.
I know they're so scared out there. I know so many children are dying, and I don't want them to feel so scared.
Yeah, so they're in a shelter right now.
Half a world away, friends at Whitney Young High School in Chicago feel the emotion and concern. The students met online 2 days before Russian troops invaded Ukraine. As things intensified, they continued to stay in touch as best they could.
That was like something that moved us forward, that gave us motivation to continue to work with them and to live.
And while their final chat of the year was delayed by more than an hour inside that bunker,
it's really upsetting, and I feel like we can't do anything. Like, we literally just have to wait here until bombs go over them.
Even the threat of a missile attack couldn't keep them apart.
Oh my gosh, hello, can you hear us?
The teenagers sharing words of support and appreciation.
I really appreciate this toy.
They are really our true friends.
Both classes learning lessons not found in any textbook.
It's been, a life-changing experience, I think, for all of us.
Do you hear me?
Shaped by the dedication and resilience of those whose lives are just beginning.
They are our future.
A future that, despite the current circumstances, is filled with hope, which is why
Guys, you're the best. We love you.
they continue to sing. Jay Gray, NBC News.
Okay, so as you saw from that 2-minute clip, we were all ready to, start our live Google Meet, and then the missile sirens went off in Lubny, indicating a nearby missile, and Yulia ended up WhatsApp messaging me that they were headed to the shelter, and then, as you kind of got, we were pretty stressed about it. But about 45 minutes later, Yulia WhatsApp messaged me again, and we were able to have this beautiful session of sharing, our home stories, right? Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? What does home mean to you? And despite being 5,000 miles away from each other, it was a beautiful illustration of friendship. Some stories were obviously heartbreaking and some were comforting, but all especially from Yulia students, all of them were illustrations of tremendous resiliency. So the summer happened, and Yulia and I would just message back and forth all summer about the important as well as the mundane. And during the summer, it was just the two of us. And then the school year started again, and we were able to do live Google Meets every about 3-4 weeks. And we've been doing that since the school year started. And Yulia had this great idea at the beginning of the year that each of us have a couple of our students create live posters, which have been a great visual representation of just topics we've talked about. So we started the year talking about, food, interests, hobbies. I think a highlight was my students learning about borscht and how delicious borscht is and how we should all eat borscht every day and how borscht. And all of us got a kick out of, on both sides, Yulia students asking my students if it was true that Americans really liked a lot of fast food and how often do we eat fast food. And when all of my students responded, they all eat fast food at least a couple days a week. It was pretty amazing to Yulia students, and we all got a good laugh out of that. But other students, bonded over their love of beach volleyball or sushi or jazz music. As the year has progressed, we've had a lot of different topics. One of our topics was on music and books, and my students all have much better Spotify lists because of Yulia and her students. And at least once a week, we start a class with Shum or Kalush or one of our other new favorite Ukrainian music groups. And maybe when we go to the break, I'll play some of our now favorite Ukrainian bands for you. On Halloween, our dialogue was focused on Halloween, but also more generally, the prompt for our dialogue was, what is your favorite holiday and how does it reflect culture? And, we initially obviously talked about Halloween, but then we also talked about winter holidays, and my students found it really interesting to learn about how Christmas is celebrated in Ukraine and how a lot of Yulia students celebrate it with a lot more focus on spirituality and religion than I think a lot of my students do. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, all of the units in my class include a service-oriented or justice-oriented project, and also I love guest speakers. So in our inequality unit, I had a guest speaker from Refugee One Talk, and he talked to us about the organization. So Refugee One is the largest refugee resettlement organization in Illinois. And obviously right now, Ukrainian and Afghan refugees are the largest population that Refugee One is helping resettle. And so a group of my students created a really outstanding coat drive. But before the coat drive, I guess, a really outstanding marketing campaign around the school to get people to donate coats. So they created this beautiful poster and hung it all over the school. They were regularly making PA announcements and posting little advertisements in our weekly newsletter, and were ultimately able to donate like 7 huge bags full of winter coats to Refugee One. So as Yulia talked about a little bit, and as our earlier presenter talked about a little bit, access to electricity has gotten a lot more difficult in Ukraine this fall when Putin started specifically targeting his missiles on energy sources. Yulia, her students in the whole town typically have access to electricity 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and 2 hours in the middle of the night. And their scheduled time of access changes, and depending where you are in Ukraine also, dictates when your hours of electricity are. So since the fall, we've had to edit and change up when we're meeting a number of times. As you can see, this is a WhatsApp message from Yulia. Her and her students are always, amazing us. So they were supposed to have electricity on one of the days we had planned for our Google Meet, but when they arrived at school ready to log on, it ended up that this school did not have electricity. And so they walked 1.5 miles to a cafe, and the cafe was inside of a hotel, and the hotel had a generator, and so electricity, and they were able to set up, classroom shop at the cafe, and we were able to, do our, Google Meet. It's just another example of, how Russia is weaponizing the Ukrainian winter, but then also how Ukrainians, I think, are resiliently fighting back and, continuing to, teach and learn and live life. So December, Yulia had the awesome idea of going old school, and we did handwritten letters to each other. So all of us, all of our students had different students in each other's countries to write letters to, which was really meaningful. As I mentioned, all of our Google Meets include live posters, and I never give any direction to what you're supposed to do. I just have 1 or 2 students volunteer to create something visual so that we remember that Google Meet. And after our December Google Meet, my student Olivia handed me her picture that she drew, and I was blown away. So just had to share it with you because she created this beautiful portrait of each of our friends in Lubny. So because of our friendship with Yulia and her students, my students and I have paid acute attention to all of the news stories relating to Ukraine and Russia, whether it's access to electricity, food insecurity, missile strikes, anything and everything. This most recent Google Meet we had was on the topic of media literacy and democracy. And specifically, we talked about, how do you find out what is going on in your community? How has misinformation impacted you in your community? And here's a short little clip of our Google Meet conference. And sometimes there's awkward pauses, so just, go with it. Okay.
Oh yeah, hold on, that's actually a really interesting question. Do you guys use TikTok a lot, or do you use like a... Oh yeah, hold on, that's actually a really interesting question. Do you guys use TikTok a lot, or do you use like a separate...
The most popular source of news for my students is TikTok, hence the reason my student is asking about that. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone. Hold on. I did not mean to do that.
Oh yeah, hold on this. That's actually a really interesting question. Do you guys use TikTok a lot, or do you use like a separate like video sharing platform sort of thing?
Hi everybody. So yes, we use TikTok a lot. I personally do. So yeah, that's it. Also about messengers, we have a messenger like WhatsApp, but it's more Western European, better. It doesn't collect personal data and doesn't sell it. That's pretty good. Yeah. So Telegram, yeah. It's called. I'm sorry. I guess everybody in this room have this app, and it's pretty crazy. You can create the channels and post whatever you want. So in this messengers, different corporations or people who just post news, memes, yeah, maybe you should try it. Do you have like any questions?
Yeah, thank you. It's similar to a messenger app we have in America called Discord, but it sounds like you guys probably developed it way before any of us came up with it.
We also have Discord. We're not like sort of a world country as somebody may think of us. We have internet. So yeah.
Is anyone else?
Hi, I'm Olivia. Usually I find out information from my mom. Do you guys like have the same? Like you come home and she's like, Olivia, by the way, be careful going out because I heard there's like dangerous men in the area. Young girls have been going missing. Be careful. And I never leave my bedroom, so I don't know why she's telling me that.
All right, so you get a little idea of how our Google Meets go every month. So we spent an entire block exploring Reporters Without Borders website, and I love using Harvard's Project Zero thinking routines to guide our class discussions. I probably use them, I don't know, at least once a week. And so just starting class with, what do you see? What do you think about? What does that make you wonder? And this map gets at world press freedom globally. And in the video conference that I just showed you a moment ago, we also discussed misinformation with our friends in Lubny. And one of the questions they asked us was if we thought their President Zelensky was a puppet of President Biden's. And when 100% of my students said no, and also that none of my students had ever even heard this rumor, they were really relieved to hear this. And this is because this is one of the many pieces of Russian disinformation that is being pushed in Ukraine and neighboring countries. Last week, thanks to the Pulitzer Center, who's another one of my favorite organizations that I work with, journalist Simon Ostrovsky joined our class. He joined last year, a week before the war, and he joined again this year. Both years, his topic was on Russian disinformation, but obviously this year, I think my students were even more attuned to what he was talking about. Simon Ostrovsky is a journalist, and he's been covering Russian disinformation for 20 years. He worked at the Moscow Times. He worked for Vox News. He's done a lot of reporting for the New York Times. He's currently a producer and journalist at PBS NewsHour. On a side note, he's actually returning to Ukraine in a couple weeks. And so if you watch PBS NewsHour, his upcoming piece will be featured on there. So he talked to us about Russian disinformation and also about reporting on the atrocities in Bucha. I just want to mention this because one, I think this is a really important part of, understanding, of understanding the Ukrainian, what's happening in Ukraine and just how many atrocities Putin has created for people in Ukraine. Also, on a side note, so this is Simon, obviously, and this is Joya. Joya is the point person from the Pulitzer Center for Chicago. And just like her name suggests, she's a joy to work with. So I encourage you, if you don't work with Pulitzer Center already, to check them out. And if you want me to electronically introduce you to Joya, I would be happy to. My students and I have been indelibly impacted by Yulia and her students. I could have all 30 of my students talk to you, but we have a lunch break to get to. So let me play you one.
At the beginning of the year, after our first Google Meet with the class in Ukraine, I was excited at the opportunity to speak to students who were our age and so similar to us, and yet immersed in war on the other side of the world, an experience that I could not personally fathom. I was also nervous and uneasy because of the language barrier and technological difficulties that sometimes made communication difficult. On top of that, I felt uncomfortable because I did not think that I was knowledgeable enough about Ukraine and feared making a misguided comment. I did not know how we could possibly convey our regret that they were forced to live through an unfair, unjustified war, and worried that they would feel we were ignorant. However, as the year went on and we continued to meet with the class in Lubny, Ukraine, I felt the discomfort slip away, replaced instead with joy to see them, relief at their smiling faces, and the familiar camaraderie of being something like friends. It amazes me that they can live through a bloody conflict in which their lives are so drastically impacted, hiding in bunkers, without energy for much of the day, without in-person education and connection, and subject to military efforts against their home country, and yet be smiling, lighthearted, and funny every time we see them. They are always so curious and inquisitive about our lives while being so deeply insightful and thoughtful about their own. They approach difficulties, from English not being their first language to the rising crime rates in their country, with a sense of courage and fearlessness. I have learned more about resilience and the importance of connection from our online relationship than I have through any in-person relationship in my life. I seek to live with my life with as much kindness, compassion, strength, and humor as they live theirs. It always brightens the dark 8 a.m. room to see their smiles and hear their stories. I am always surprised by how similar we are and how easy it is to overcome barriers like distance and language if both sides truly make an effort. I feel connected with these students and know they have changed the way that I view the world, humanizing a world conflict I had once felt distant from, and modeling a way to live that renews my hope in the future of humanity. Thank you.
My students and I are all more empathetic and more globally minded because of this experience. My students and I have all become ambassadors of Ukraine because of our exchange. My students and I are regularly talking to family members, friends, community, neighbors, actually anyone who will listen to us, to tell them what we have learned from Yulia and their students, whether it's about, dealing with very little access to electricity, or hearing about the fact that many of the men in their community were moved to the front lines last week, or thinking about the fact that they all have family members and cousins in Kyiv and Lviv and other places that have been tremendously hit. Despite the fact that we are 5,000 miles away from each other, we have developed an incredible friendship with each other. As I mentioned earlier, I'd be getting back to this slide, and now I'm finishing my presentation with where I started. Global education is absolutely essential to our ever-changing and increasingly globalized, interconnected world. Global education is about connecting the global to the local. It's about encouraging students' curiosity to investigate the world. It's about finding connections, recognizing diverse perspectives. It's about creating empathy in a more empathetic world. Global education is about getting students to become more effective, engaging in dialogue with different groups, ultimately to make action to make the world a better place. With technology today and the endless educational organizations that exist, it is easier than ever for us to connect with the other 96% of the world's population. I'd love to talk to you about any of these other amazing organizations that I like to use in my class, but I know lunch is about to start, so I just want to thank you. Dziękuję. That's thank you in Ukrainian.